Well, first of all, Tom, I just really want to appreciate you and thank you a lot because you've been through so much. And I think what's always great about people who go through their own mental health journey is when they have a desire to want to give back, pay it forward in some way. And your story is really unique and powerful in that you've gone through something that, especially since COVID happened, we've seen a lot of people with the types of challenges that you started with. And so I know that you're going to be able to pass along a really a good set of helpful takeaways for them and a lot of good advice. So if we could start, can you just kind of give some background on, what brought you into the program? What were you dealing with? What was daily life like? Stuff like that.
Um, I was dealing with not being able to go anywhere. My life was getting smaller and smaller compared to living within tighter confinements to my house.
Hmm.
And I had been like that I would get so good, and then I'd run into a little stumbling block, and then okay, I'm retreating back, and then go see somebody else, another therapist, or do another program, and okay, let's try to take steps forward again. And it was just like a yo-yo,
Yo-yo.
and I
Gotcha.
and I still could never get very good.
So, and what at the peak of the anxiety level, you were only driving like how far around your house? Was it like a 5 mile radius?
If that, probably more like a
Three
three to
miles.
five.
Gotcha. And that was like, as you called, like the comfort zone, right?
Yes.
All right. Gotcha. So what were some of the things, because I think a lot of people listening will be able to relate to that. Like, what were some of the methods that you tried that maybe weren't so helpful? Like, if you can get more specific with that, or maybe you found something before you worked with me that was helpful too, that maybe people should know about.
Mainly before, it was with counseling and just going out and being like going for rides every day, and then
Like,
not dealing with my thoughts like during the ride. It was just
mhm.
exposure therapy.
I was exposure.
And yeah, and then going to a counselor and just talking about the issues in my life.
Right. Right. Gotcha. And then I think, and then medication, obviously, too, which
Yes.
you're kind of a rarity in that you did have a decent response to medication. So that was at least helping. It just wasn't like sufficient,
Yeah.
it was still highly limiting of your life. And
Yeah, I still couldn't go very far distances, and I didn't want to try to rely on that to do normal things, like just to go down the road or something.
right. Because wasn't it like three Xanax or something to like go
Yes.
at the peak of it?
To go to my mother-in-law's, it's probably 7 miles away.
Right. Gotcha. And so, and this all sparked, if I remember correctly, because you were just driving one day, and then all of a sudden it seemed like anxiety just kind of came out of the blue, right? And then,
My first panic attack?
mm-hmm, yeah,
Yes. Yeah,
got
I
it.
can still remember, even though it was 30 some years ago, I can still remember it like yesterday.
Right. So you've been dealing with this your whole life, pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what life was like before that, before
Right.
this.
Right. And I think the reason I wanted to note that is a lot of times people are wondering, where the hell did this come from? And you are a good example of what happens for a lot of people, which is the phenomenon of just getting anxious about getting anxious, right? And so with, what we typically call agoraphobia, where it's a problem driving far away from home or being in a new environment or something like that, that will be the trigger, the unique trigger for the anxiety, but it's still that core anxious pattern of imagining something bad's going to happen and then kind of narrating to ourselves, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Or in your
Yeah.
case, I know it was what if was a big one for
Yeah.
you, right?
But yeah, the phrase "what if" was
Right,
my big trigger
right,
of what if and then something negative.
right, right, right,
Um, but with your program, I've learned to take that "what if" to something negative and say, "What if I can do this? What if I do have a good time? What if I do succeed?"
right, right. Yeah, and it took you a while. It's this process. I think it's important for people to realize there isn't a silver bullet. Like I'm never in favor of let's get your mental health fixed quick Well, I am. I mean, I want to do it done quickly, but I don't want it to be done quicker than it can be. And what was great about you is you were so diligent about each week just having a tiny little, I mean, it took us a while to get you going. I remember that first month was a little challenging because the patterns were so embedded, right? But
Yes.
once we got that momentum going, we just kind of bit off a little piece each week to decrease it and make sure the overall trend was going in the right direction. And
Yes.
you deserve so 99% of the credit here because you were just so diligent with your practice, and it is a practice and conditioning based thing. You have to train your mind to think differently. That's the only way to get this thing handled, and you really are a good example of that. um, do you have any thoughts you want to share about like what that process was like, or anything you'd want someone listening to kind of know or learn, like that couple months where you were really diligently working to
Um,
train your mind?
yeah, I learned the biggest thing, one of the bigger things for me was when you said look for everything red, then close your eyes and try to imagine something blue.
Hmm.
And of course, I couldn't close my eyes when I was driving, but I'd see something red and I'd say, okay, now we got to find something blue. Now
Hmm.
just get my mind off of, okay, what's going on here? What's going on here? And, you know, I like listen, my music was playing as loud as it could probably play in my truck as I
Hmm.
was going for a ride, just to keep my mind occupied with that also.
Yeah.
Um, the biggest thing was getting over the hurdle of what if something negative could happen, to trying to get that what if out of my head and something good happening. I will tell everybody a story from this week. Um, Wednesday, my biggest fear was always going somewhere and not being able to get back home.
Yeah.
Wednesday morning, I went to go for my ride, and the road was closed down at 22. There was a dump truck and a car hit it from the back end.
Hmm.
They had to close the road down to get everything cleaned up. And my initial thought was, wow, I'm glad I didn't go for a ride earlier this morning. A, I could have been in the wreck, or B, could have been on the other side of it and had to take go a different route home and be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I said, well, we're going to make myself uncomfortable anyway. And I went an extra distance further out than what I normally go, and just to prove it to myself, hey, I can do this. And
Yes.
then this morning, I said, you know what? I have to go down 22 today,
Yeah.
past to where that accident was, and prove to myself, hey, I can do this.
Yep.
And then I even went to there, and I went to a hardware store about 8 miles away. And that's the first time I've been in a big store like that without any medication for probably 15 years.
Wow.
And I made a decision to, hey, I can do this. I'll be able to go in there and do this. And I had very minimal anxiety.
Right.
Um, it was the initial going in was it. The I had to have a guy help me, and I'm like, oh, I'm walking with him, and he's taking my part that I need. What happens if I flip out? And I was like, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to flip out. Everything's going to be fine. We'll just go and do this. And I was in there for probably a half hour,
Right.
and after my initial two thoughts of, oh my goodness, after that everything was fine.
Right. Good.
They didn't even notice I was a little bit anxious, but
Yep.
that's all I was, just a little bit anxious. And um, so it's
Yep.
all everybody. It's all your thought process and how you pres- uh, how you
Perceive.
yeah, and represent the situation,
Right.
like what your prospect is of the situation. Like, it's nothing danger. You're only saying it's danger to yourself,
Right.
and you have to get your mind out of that mindset to be able to do that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and
Well.
again, my wife and I have been able to go out to dinner. I haven't been able to do that for 30 years without any medication.
Mhm.
Over July 4th, that week, we stayed at a cabin about 6 miles from my house. That's the first time I haven't slept. Well, I've moved into my house here in 1998, 97. That's the first time I've not slept in my house since then. I've not gone on any vacations. I've not gone anywhere. And without this program, I could not have went and done that.
Yeah. Huge. I mean, that's when I knew. I was like, all right, he's good to go now, once those
Yeah.
couple last barriers were crossed.
Yes.
So, there's a couple tidbits you hit on there that I think are important for people to understand. One of them was, I really love what you said about you were driving that day, and you knew that your route was going to have to be broken. You decided to embrace the uncomfortability, right? And
Yes.
one of the key things that we talked so much about was how the mind can get really addicted to this feeling of certainty, like wanting to know
Yes.
exactly how it's going to go and needing to have every little variable pinned down. And that's what creates anxiety. And so one of the key things we worked on was you have to get yourself comfortable with being uncertain. You have to be okay not knowing exactly how things are going to go. And ironically, the more comfortable you get being uncertain, the more certain you feel. And that's definitely your story is a good example of that. Another key thing, I know a lot of people try the exposure thing. And so it's not surprising that that was a challenge for you. We did have to get you comfortable in new environments, but one of the points I want people to know that we did differently is I'm a big believer in what I call deliberate practice. I know you and I talked about this a few times, Tom. You might not remember the exact way I explained it before, but just this idea of like, okay, well, let's make sure that when you go into this environment, we're going to do this particular thing a little differently. So that way we decrease the anxiety level, right? So we always were very sniper like. We were very, isolated on making the incremental improvements. And I think that's what boosted your confidence over time as you went, oh, all right, well, now I can feel comfortable doing this. And
Yeah.
so, and
Because
even,
Wednesday when I went on my ride, I was like, yeah, I can remember a time when I went past here and I was, oh my goodness, I got to find something blue, got to do this, got to do that. And I'm just cruising by having a good time now.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I went to, and it's so relieving to be able to start to do that. And I want everybody to know I'm not completely fixed yet. I'm on the right path to be able to do things in my life where I want to do and be able to do them.
Right.
And it's this time I found too, it's as good as the work you put into it. And your training methods are far superior to anything I've ever dealt with and done in my 30 years of having this. I wish I would have had this 28 years ago because I think I'd be limitless in my life, and I would have been limitless in my life.
Right.
Then.
Right. Right. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't get it to you back then, but I was
you probably weren't even born yet.
I was right around that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that's the thing, we were even talking about when do we kind of graduate you, right? And a key thing I want everybody to know is it's not about reaching this mythical place where there's never ever a negative feeling, there's never ever a worry. It's about reaching a place where your quality of life is no longer inhibited by repetitive, intrusive thoughts. The life that you want to live is no longer inhibited. And that's what you've achieved in this last month. I mean, you're, as you told me last time, like you're able to do what you want to do. You don't feel limited to do the things that you want to get done. You're feeling pleased and content. And that's what it's all about. It's not about getting perfection. It's just about getting.
No, because if you shoot for perfection in this program, you're never going to make any progress.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
I lost my train of thought.
I was just going to say the urge for perfection is again that urge to feel totally certain, right?
Yes.
And that urge to be, I need to be 1000% anxiety free is one of the most anxiety inducing lines of thinking,
And the other one is you have to get rid of the thing that you have to be in control also.
Right.
There's no such thing as total control.
Right. Well, and that's what you've done in the recent months, right? You went from being comfortable driving to being comfortable driving on new routes that you're not used to then letting other people drive and relinquishing that control, right? So you've already gone through all those different stages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Question for you. What is your, so whenever I work with other people who've got the agoraphobia thing going on, they always talk about a comfort zone, and for you, I remember one of the little mental habits you had was you were like kind of constantly checking like the mileage, like, okay, well, how many, if I'm going to go here, how many miles is that? And if I'm going to go here, how many miles is that? Right.
Yeah.
And kind of you had this preconceived notion of where your comfort zone was and where it ended and where it began. How has that shifted for you?
Uh, I try not to. I don't think about it as a comfort zone anymore. I
Exactly.
think of it
Yeah.
as I go along and then I use the tools I've learned to ease the anxiety. I
Great.
still can feel anxious,
Yeah.
but I can go ahead and then return, say, okay, I can breathe. I'm going to live through this. Just calm down. Do all my other things I've learned. Is where in the past it would be as soon as that thought got in my head, what if I get stuck here? Game was over. I couldn't tell you when I turned around what I did, any of that, and I was gone.
Right. Well, then I think what you just gave me the answer I was hoping you would give me, which is I don't know if I explained it to you in this terminology, but actually I think it was through working with you that I gave you this recommendation, and then I kind of coined this term later. I was like, you know what, other people need to know this, and I was trying to think about what to call it, and I called it I'm calling it therapeutic deletion. Because sometimes the reason why we're feeling a particular feeling is we just keep staring at that painful thing that we don't need to be staring at. And so one of the key things was like you were so hung up on the mileage, and all of this stuff. And I was like, let's forget about the mileage. Like, let's focus on these other things. Let's train the brain to go this direction and this direction and this direction instead. And that's where the anxiety has gone. It's that's why it's mostly evaporated for you. Is your mind is not going back to those same rabbit holes that always caused it to feel bad.
Yes.
Which is great. Um, so yeah, I mean, we've hit on most of the really, really great points. I think this is fantastic. I think we can kind of move to a close. A couple final questions would just be, now that you successfully left home and you slept in a different bed and went on a little trip, with your family, and you were able to successfully be fully away from home. And you've been able to, go do these different things. Like, does this change for you what you envision for the future? Like, does this change any goals you have or anything of that nature? Whereas before, maybe you thought, oh no, I just definitely can't do that.
Yeah. It changes the fact that I'm starting to feel a lot more comfortable to be uncomfortable and realize that the little bit of anxiety is not going to, turn into a full blown panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I have the tools now to cope with them.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, how do I want to say this?
Like kill the monster
Diffuse
while it's
them.
small.
Yeah, diffuse them.
Mm-hmm.
Put them down. Just
Yeah.
just
So
do away with that.
instead of it's only anxiety with a lowercase a, not like
Yeah.
anxiety with the uppercase a,
Yes,
where
with
it's
uppercase A. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
not no longer, hey Tom, go do this, and it's even like close things to home. Like if I had to take my wife with me or ride with my wife, it was a capital A. It
Right.
was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Now it's eh, a tiny little A, but I just walk through it and talk to myself and talk to my wife and that, and
Yeah.
it works out good.
Right. Awesome. So yeah, just a lot more comfort, it sounds like, is in store for you in the future, a lot
Yes.
more. Yeah. Excellent. The last question I'd have for you would be for someone for someone who's in the position that you were in a few months ago, right? They feel really limited. They feel trapped in the anxiety, the agoraphobia. Maybe they've been dealing with it their whole life, like you were, for decades. What would you want them to know? What advice would you give them, or just anything you'd want to say to them?
Um, don't give up. Don't let the little setbacks control what you do. Um, don't be so perfect in trying to know every step of your lessons.
Mm,
That was my issue when I first started this. I had to understand and master every little thing. And it took me quite a while for you till you kept telling me you don't have to master everything, just go through it and do it.
yeah.
And you said it'll help. And that's another big thing too, that you don't have to worry about mastering it all. And just going through the program, building off of all your success, not not concentrating on your any failures you might have, but building on the success.
Yeah, I definitely remember having to remind you of that one at least a dozen times, right? Gotta,
Yes.
I'd always ask you like, hey, what'd you do well this week? And you're like, well, what I didn't do well.
Yeah, I did this, but
All right.
I didn't do this as well.
All
And
right.
yeah, that was one of my biggest hurdles to come over too.
Yeah.
Because like I said, like I told you, I've been in this twice as long with panic attacks as I have been without.
Yeah.
And it was just a really big thing to learn to think differently
Yes.
and retrain my brain not to go to that place. And there's so many things in this program that'll help everybody.
Excellent. Well, I'll close by simply saying that what I've learned doing this work for a long time is that, as soon as we get the anxiety and the stress and the sadness to melt away, somebody's real soul kind of emerges. And, from the very beginning, even though you were feeling anxious and afraid, I could tell just how high caliber of a man you are. You are incredibly like caring and attentive and loving to your wife, and how much you care about the people you work with and your customers. And you just are like one of those really remarkably heartfelt men. And it's been a pleasure to be able to work with you. And now that you've got this
Thank
little
you.
shroud off of your back, you can just spread that love and that smile of yours even further and farther. So it's really great.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't have done this journey without you though. Like I said, I've tried everything. Nothing else would work for me.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. Well, as long as you got there in the end, and you still got many years ahead of you, so enjoy them.
Okay.
Awesome,
Okay,
Tom.
sir.
Until our paths cross again. All right, be well and give your best to my wife, or your wife. Excuse me.
Okay, you give your best to my wife too, and well, I understand. Yeah, and I hope her health turns around and stays good for quite a while.
Thank you very much. All right, Tom.
Okay.
All right, awesome, Tom. Bless you. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
see you soon. Bye.